So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to try to, I'm aiming for the most nihilistic and dark future of the night. So I'm going to say that Nico's future might not even be a problem for reasons we're about to see. So my talk is entitled Dragons and Fireflies, and it's talking about divergent health comes at the end of civilization. So, ooh, there we go. So Dragons and Fireflies, too long, didn't listen. Okay, at the same time that it's becoming easier than ever to die, it's becoming possible, although incredibly expensive, to stay alive for astounding lengths of time. Moreover, if we do nothing, we risk fracturing the population into what I'm calling dragons and fireflies. Dragons, a handful of folks living hundreds of years, perhaps indefinitely, and fireflies, folks who wink in and out of existence relative to the dragons. Okay, to motivate this, I'm going to see if I can break down some of the conceptual fences that I'd say defenses that we put up around thinking about healthcare, economic production and distribution, and ecology. So I think that one of the strategies we have for avoiding the cognitive dissonance of really recognizing this stuff is to kind of shoebox all of these different fields, and we can merge them together and scare ourselves quite a lot. Okay, so who am I? Who am I to be telling you this? So I've got a master's in philosophy. During my studies, most of my 20s, I was focused on applied ethics, political philosophy, meta-ethics, don't ask, and bioethics. I completed an internship at the Joint Center for Bioethics at Mount Sinai Hospital and University of Toronto, focused on pandemic response. This is back shortly after SARS, so it was knowing what to do with a lot of infected people was all the rage. And these days, I make my living as a coder. I'm also an activist, and I'm also in the process of producing 2 books, one of which is a science fiction novel, and for which I did a whole bunch of research. So, and part of the research is what we're seeing tonight. So, okay, so for the purposes of this talk, I need to sort of definition of terms, like, good standard philosophical way to begin. I'm going to start by asking, what is health? So, what do folks here think health is? Generally speaking, lots of different things like quality. People, have you heard the phrase "quality of life"? Anyone? So that's basically how comfortable you are. Like, does your day suck? Reliably, or do you have pretty good quality of life? Do you get to go skiing? Do you get, So that's quality. That's a huge thing, right? Obviously, lifespan is something that everyone's familiar with. But these concepts are actually pretty blurry. So, and I'm just going to, for the purposes of this talk, kind of squish most of that blur aside. But just for the record, there's a lot of ambiguity around whether or not health includes things like mental health. There's culturally bound distinctions and determinations like that, disability, and gerontology. So just how whether aging is considered an illness or just a part of life. These are decisions that are normative. That means that they're cultural and ethical. But we're going to simplify things for tonight. We're just going to say it parses down into a combination of a lifespan and quality of life. So my little thumbnail formula here, which is you'll never get through any 101 course with this, but lifespan times quality of life equals health. Sound good? Check. Okay. So a brief history of unequal outcomes. So okay. So here's where I'm just going to start to sort of dip in a little bit deeper. So as you probably know. As I'm going to misquote Orwell here, all societies are unequal. Some are more unequal than others. Generally speaking, as we move forward in terms of technological sophistication, we're becoming increasingly unequal, and that's sort of a pattern that's, anthropologically speaking, is shown to play out more often than not. Let's see. So thus, under civilization, health has probably always been distributed also unevenly, although in some situations more unevenly than others. So you can expect that if you go back far enough, you're going to find that early rulers, had probably didn't live very long by our standards and have that great health, but probably had on average better health than the folks that were probably building their pyramids. So there's always been the possibility of having poor health, of having poor health capital, I'll say, foreshadowing a little bit, relative to other members of the community. And so one of the effects of so everyone here knows poverty is like pretty bad, right? Well, poverty is not just a little bit bad. Like, I think sometimes in our present economics, it's just to kind of like make things feel a little, kind of numb out a little bit. We try to imagine that poverty is this kind of like, it's like, oh, well, I don't have much money. Poverty is actually really serious stuff when it comes to health. So effects of poverty, everyone knows that poverty is linked to all sorts of unpleasant things like illness, mental illness, poverty, addiction. One of the major changes, one of the major moves forward that we've discovered is, who here has heard of ACEs? ACEs? One person's heard of ACEs, anyone else? Adverse childhood experiences. Anyone know about this? So adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are basically a set of factors, and you can actually go online to a website called aces2high.com if you're interested, and you can find out your ACE score, which is a way of finding out specifically for you what your, what kind of, how basically how shitty your childhood was, and it really goes to 11, right? So like, there are folks out there with some very high ACE scores, and they tend to cluster. So if you have a couple, you're probably going to have more. So. And the more ACEs you have, and I'm reading a quote here from aces2high.com, the more ACEs you have, the greater your risk of chronic disease, mental illness, violence, or being a victim of violence. Each type of trauma counts as one, no matter how many times it occurs. People with an ACE score of 4 are twice as likely to be smokers. Having an ACE score of 4 increases risk of emphysema and chronic bronchitis. Okay, but this is still behavioral stuff. It gets worse. People with higher ACE scores are more likely to commit suicide. They're more likely to have broken marriages, more broken bones, more drug prescriptions, more depression, and something that affects me with my asthma and my eczema, more autoimmune diseases. People with an ACE score of 6 or higher on a scale of 10 have are at risk of having their lives shortened by 20 years. So, think about that. This means that like bad things happen to you when you're a kid, and your body literally starts. And it's not just like behavioral stuff. It's like you seem to be put together less well. That's not the case, but that would be how it might naively appear. Just a quick sidebar. This is actually uncannily and probably. This is uncannily similar to some of the beliefs in traditional Eastern medicine, which often seek to explain present disease in terms of childhood experience. So I think that's just kind of an interesting, it's quite possible that another civilization got to this possibility of ACEs first. Anyway, at the same time, you got these ACEs going down, right? You also have these incredible changes in technology that are making it possible now to live for very long lengths of time. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but soon and going forward. Nikolas, the organizer of this event, actually had a really great article recently that was in, I think it was CTV, about these. So just a couple of these that you probably might be familiar with. Some basic ones that civilizations have had for a while. Diet and exercise. Right? This is like, this is very like low tech, but it's still technology, right? You go back far enough, and like people like Pythagoras, the ancient Greek philosopher was there, he thought that, you could really improve health by cutting out beans out of the diet because they made you flatulent, right? It's kind of laughable stuff now, but people have been working on this for a while, and we've actually, we've finally kind of, gotten around to some pretty good ideas about what exercise and what diet actually do extend life. And so, you've already got the more well-to-do folks who are able to live much longer because of this. Okay, where are we here? Okay. Oh, excuse me. So, but moving forward from there, you've also got things like, you've got really sexy sort of sci-fi stuff happening. We've got CRISPR-9 stuff. So how many here know that they've found a drug that cures leukemia this year? How many people knew that? One. So we've got there's a new drug, a living drug that's made out of people's own cells, own immune systems, and it costs $500,000 more or less per treatment. So, and you've got things like organs, you've got all these cool science fiction things. And I'm not actually going to dwell too much on them just because I just don't find them quite as exciting as you might expect for the reasons I'm about to go into. Okay. So you've also got, I'm going to skip ahead here. So on one side, you've got contenders. So basically, I'm thinking this is kind of like a wrestling match between two kind of opposing forces. You've got medicine on one hand with these science fiction cures for things, gene editing, living drug. You've got synthetic organs. Oh, who here has heard of basis? It's another really cool one. Basis is a pill that you can now purchase that extends your lifespan by shutting down one of the pathways of aging. It's actually it costs $60. I haven't tried it myself, but I'm probably going to. And you and you also have this thing called ambrosia. Who's here has heard of ambrosia? Anyone? No, not the salad, although that was a good guess. No, ambrosia is a startup that will actually let you, as a wealthy middle-aged person, circulate through your veins the blood of a young person. You can literally, inject the blood of a young person to live longer. Okay, so that's, so you've got this, you can kind of see how this is where this is going now. You've got, on one side, we've got these sort of incredible things that are happening. And on the other side, you've got some other really terrible things. So guess what? So what do you think will increase ACEs? What do you think will drive that forward? Well, climate change, right? So, it's already up on this screen. It's kind of silly asking you guys. So, yeah, climate change is going to do a really bad thing, right? Which is going to destabilize everything. It's going to cause, you've got the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Traditionally it's like what? It's disease, war, famine, and death. I always think that's a little redundant because those things lead to death, right? So, like, what's death, doing there? So, I'm going to say the new four horsemen are ACEs, disease, and war and famine. So, and guess what? Climate change drives them all. Climate change is kind of like, if the horsemen could do a Captain Planet routine, they'd summon climate change, right? So yeah. Let me see what we got here. Okay, so I think it should go without saying that, and just remark that the technologies that are now becoming available to extend lifespan are all incredibly expensive. And they'll probably remain so, possibly indefinitely, because what happens in a collapsing market is that you don't actually get the economies of scale required to bring things down in price, right? So given the fact that we're in climate change, we're now facing a situation where James Hansen, the guy who ran the climate program at NASA for like 20 years and introduced the concept of global warming in the House of Congress of the US, that guy is now telling people that he believes that the world may become ungovernable in 20 years because of food supply shortages and because of the displacement caused by rising waters in cities and collapsing economies. So what's happening effectively is you're having these incredible sort of death-promoting forces emerge as human beings lose habitat. Human beings are a species, and we have a certain habitat, and we're losing it. And so we're going to face the same extinction pressures that any other animal that loses habitat would face. So, yeah, we've already talked about the gene editing, synthetic organs, basis and Elysium Health, ambrosia. So yeah, and the new quartet, the new four horsemen, climate change. Oh, right, and xenopathogens. So when I was at U of T and the Joint Center for Bioethics, I worked under a guy named Kerry Bowman who specialized in xenopathogens. So who here can name some, anyone here know what a xenopathogen is? Anyone got? So, yeah, we got one. Anyone else? So xenopathogen is a disease where the reservoir population is another species, like monkeys, whatever. So can anyone name some xenopathogens? HIV, SARS, influenza, the plague, anything else? Ebola, right? So these are some nasty things. Some of the worst things that you can come down with are xenopathogens. Guess what's happening as climate change is causing displacement? We're encroaching on habitats where lots of creatures might have things that we haven't seen before. And in fact, we're already seeing this. Remember the swine flu thing that came out a few years ago, right? That just a lot more. So, and the other thing is, the other thing that's happening are sacrifice zones. So I don't know if any of you have read Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything, But she talks a lot about sacrifice zones, and one of the effects of declining resources in a sort of a stripped-down planet is that we're kind of constantly enlarging the patches of the planet we've kind of like decided to kind of give up on, right? Like the tar sands. It's like, oh, for this northern Alberta, who cares, right? Just let it burn, right? Well, the problem is that those sacrifice zones have been getting larger for like the last 100 years or so, and everyone in those zones has to get displaced. So you've got climate change, xenopathogens, and sacrifice zones all kind of coming together, and these are all kind of forms of ecological collapse. Of course, though, climate change is the big one. So connecting the dots. Extending life is very expensive and will remain so. Human habitat loss is irreversible on meaningful timescales, right? So we're never going to be able to, drain the seas as they rise. And so that means that by necessity, you're going to have two very distinct populations. You're going to have folks that can afford healthcare and folks that can't. And so, of course, the number of people that can't afford healthcare is going to be most folks. So, I know that everyone here is kind of used to thinking of themselves as, the sort of person that can afford healthcare. That depends on like a rich middle class and an abundant civilization. That in turn depends on not having displaced populations and cities that are underwater. And that in turn means that you're out of luck. You're not, you and your kids are probably not going to be the dragons, right? So conclusion, so summary, and then questions, because I want to kind of drag out some questions from the audience if possible, because I feel like this is the sort of thing that people need to poke at a little bit. But in summary, there's not a hell of a lot we can do, and I've honestly put call to action here as kind of almost a sort of a dark joke. Because I'm not really sure what we can do. I mean, I don't really think that, even if we were to have like a good old-fashioned like Marxist revolution kind of 1917 style, I don't think it would actually do anything in time, because, you're still going to have an economy that's based largely on, So it's just really not clear to me what we can do to prevent these things from going forward. And so that's basically it. Anyone have any questions?
Do say the questions really loudly. We'll do 3 or 4 questions.
Yeah.
So, what are you going to do to protect yourself?
I'm not.
Live forever.
The only thing you can really do if you want to live forever is become insanely wealthy. But that's actually not going to be a very fun thing. And everyone thinks it's going to be fun to survive, but I mean, it's a cliche, but the dead might be the lucky ones. I mean, the people that, are dragons will actually have to live off the Fireflies. Oh, and this is the important point. I actually forgot to mention. You can think of the global economy right now as serving as a kind of a pump. You can think of it as a pump, because the way it's focused on it's causing climate change clearly, and it's also solving healthcare problems. So in effect, what the global economy is doing is it's serving to pump years of life, Princess Bride style, out of the many and giving it to the few. So if you want to survive that way, then good luck, best of luck. But it's probably going to be pretty unpleasant, because you're going to have to. It's going to be awkward. There's going to be pitchforks and torches after you. Anyway, anyone else?
Yeah, I just suggested everybody read a novel by Aldous Huxley called Ape in Essence, which there's a doctor who believes exactly what you're saying. And this is quite some time ago. That's just a point of interest. And I guess the other thing I would say is, when I was a child growing up and I'm not a child anymore, growing up in Canada, I was absolutely convinced we'd not see the 1980s, and that this is the 1950s, 60s, because of nuclear war.
Yeah.
And we somehow, at least for now, we found a way out of that. I'm not saying we're going to find a way out of the thing we're talking about, because I haven't a clue how we would. But it's just a point of optimism from experience.
For sure, and this is something I've heard a lot of times from folks that have lived through that period too, because they say, oh, well, we survived that one, we're going to survive the next one. It's important to remember what the default position is for these various possibilities. The default position for nuclear war is that you stay alive because you don't have a nuclear war. The default position for us in 2017 with the carbon-based economy that we've got, is that we're probably going to die. Right, like we're already in the in the room that's getting smaller. So, and moreover, there seems to be a really, yeah, yeah. Well, if you have a non-endothermic way of reversing 2 centuries of carbon use, I want to hear about it, but otherwise, we're probably not going to make it. At least in my opinion, I could be wrong. Next. Yeah.
I think one reason to be optimistic would be the decentralization of healthcare. Like, I don't know if you've seen the 3D printing of synthetic drugs could potentially open source.
Yeah, I'm just not that
All,
excited about that. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but that stuff won't help because people are going to still need a 3D printer. Even if you can make 3D printers really cheap, you're going to need a fab. In order to have a fab, you're going to have economies of scale. In order to have economies of scale, you're going to need an economy of scale itself, and you're not, because everyone's going to be just having moved from, their washed out Richmond home to, Whistler or something, and it's going to kind of suck.
Well, hopefully we can plan in advance for that and have 3D printers that print other 3D printers. But the other thing I've been thinking a lot about is that just basically, like, a doctor goes to school for 8 years to memorize a bunch of encyclopedias and what various conditions look like, but you could train an AI to learn that in 2 seconds and upload the entire medical knowledge of the entire world, and then an AI or a computer could potentially diagnose people for almost no cost. You could have a webcam that looks
For
at
sure.
a rash or whatever.
But
and
that computer's running silicon that came out of a fab. That fab is hella expensive. You need an economy to pay for that fab. You need banking infrastructure. You need a global economy. And you're not going to have those things because everyone's going to be super freaking broke. There's going to be 2 guys that can afford it, but they're not going to be you.
we already have those things.
Anyway, that's it.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Liz Mars.